Rick Ball replaces Chris Vosters as the new Hawks play-by-play man. I'll share my feelings on that and whether the Hawks should enter the Martin Necas sweepstakes.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Do me a favor, if you're watching on YouTube right now, make sure you hit that like button. Comment down below as well as to your reaction to Rick Ball replacing Chris Vosters as the new play-by-play man, and also whether you think the Blackhawks should kick the tires for Carolina Hurricanes RFA forward Martin Necas. Make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel as well if you're not already, because I'm going to be continuing to get into lots of prospects before day one of the 2024 NHL Draft later this month. I'm also going to be having a conversation around whether the Blackhawks should go after Jake Gensel, as his name has been thrown in the rumor mill surrounding the Blackhawks these last couple of days. And as I've talked about here recently, going to be kicking off my Chicago Blackhawks summer 2024 top 10 prospects list starting here real soon. You're not going to want to miss out on any of that, so make sure to hit that subscribe button for me. And last but certainly not least, got to let you know today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Sign up today and visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get $150 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Big news coming out regarding the Chicago Blackhawks yesterday, as well recently we've gotten rumblings that a new TV network is going to be the home of the Chicago Blackhawks for this upcoming season. NBC Sports Chicago is officially a thing of the past, as that deal with Comcast was set to expire on October 1st. And we're going to get a new TV home for not only the Blackhawks, but the Chicago Bulls and the Chicago White Sox as well, as it was announced last week that there will be a Chicago sports network coming to the city here soon. And when I talked about that, I broke down what this could mean for potential NBC Sports employees like Pat Boyle, like a reoccurring guest in Charlie Roumeliotis, Kaylee Chelios, John Scott. But I did say I thought Chris Vosters, as an employee of the Blackhawks, was going to be pretty safe with this move. Well, as we learned yesterday, that wound up not being the case, as after just 2 years as the Blackhawks play-by-play man replacing the great Pat Voley, Chris Vosters is out and Rick Ball is going to be the man replacing him. Honestly, when I saw his name, I wasn't all that familiar with Ball, but he's someone who has 25 years of hockey broadcasting experience, most recently spending the past 10 with the Calgary Flames. And you've probably also heard his voice from time to time as the play-by-play guy for Hockey Night in Canada. He's been doing that since 2011 as well. And when hearing his calls, I wouldn't say he was one of my favorite announcers in all of the league, but what I will say is it was kind of becoming clear that Chris Vosters wasn't the answer for Pat Foley here in Chicago. This was a topic I had talked about right as the Blackhawks season came to a close, and if I'm speaking truthfully, I just never really felt that connect with Vosters and the Blackhawks fans, and also with him and the team, and even just the game of hockey overall. And it was pretty clear that, he just didn't have that much experience in the game, and he's really not the one to blame. He had some huge shoes to fill. I know it was going to be lofty expectations for him, and I did think he got better, but ultimately, as the Blackhawks take this next step in their rebuild, I don't mean this negatively. I just feel like they need someone a little bit more serious to be their play-by-play guy, and Rick Ball absolutely provides that with all of his experience. His goal call is certainly better than Chris Vosters as well. And look, I don't mean this as any offense. Chris, when I met him, was a great guy from the accounts of all the Blackhawks beat writers and Charlie Roumeliotis and all the guys that are involved in the broadcast and that stuff. They said Chris was a great guy, a super hard worker, someone who was super appreciative of the opportunity and did everything in his power to do the best job that he could. But like I said, I just think it was clear that the Blackhawks, they needed to go in another direction here. Chris wasn't really progressing, I think, that the way that they had hoped. And also the Blackhawks organization, according to an article written by Ben Pope of the Chicago Sun-Times, is very interactive and involved with the fans' reactions and what they have to say about these matters. And, when Vosters first got this job, it was after a slew of tryouts by a handful of different people in the Blackhawks organization, was also taking in feedback from all the fans out there and their thoughts on this matter. And I don't know if necessarily Vosters was the fan favorite, but I could see why they went in that direction because of, the runway there. And I know a lot of people kind of made fun of him for his TikToks and whatnot, but that is something to be noted with technology going that way. And I think the Blackhawks saw an opportunity there for a guy who wants to kind of spearhead things in that direction. So I'm certainly not going to blame them for giving Chris Vosters the opportunity. It's clear that he's a very good broadcaster. Like, he's good at his job. It's just, I don't think hockey is his forte. But he's absolutely going to get better from this. It's not the last that we're going to hear about Chris Vosters. And I'm very confident, going to be a very good broadcaster. I don't know if it's going to be in hockey, but someone's going to pick him up down the line, and it's going to wind up being for the better for him. But again, I do think this was the right call by the Chicago Blackhawks. I think just in terms of taking that next serious stride in their organization, I think it makes sense to have a little bit more serious and a seasoned veteran of a play-by-play man up in the booth. So this to me was a little bit of a no-brainer. I just kind of saw things going in this direction. And I think most of the fans kind of felt the same way, although I did see it was a little tough to see some of the comments that people said on X regarding Chris Vosters, but that's just kind of the way the internet is going to work. But I am excited for the Rick Ball era to begin here, though. Based on what I've heard, like I said, I wasn't all that familiar with him, but I like his calls. I like his voice. I like his experience. And sounds like he's going to be the guy whenever the Chicago Sports Network open things up for the Blackhawks here later on in the fall when the regular season begins. I also think it's worth pointing out that Ben Pope from the Chicago Sun-Times as well said that the Chicago Sun-Times heard of a potential rift between Chris Vosters and Darren Pang, and there were some kind of awkward encounters and little conversations had on the broadcast booth. And again, I think that just kind of stems around Darren Pang is a hockey nut. He eats, breathes, lives hockey. This guy knows what he's talking about with prospects at every level, at college hockey, in the junior leagues. Like, this guy knows what he's talking about, and he's been such a great addition to the Blackhawks broadcast booth. Got to keep him around at all costs because he's truly one of a kind. But I think just kind of the way Vosters went about some of the broadcasts, and I don't think it's the worst way in the world. It was just a little light-spirited, and sometimes it felt like he wasn't taking the game serious. And for a guy like Darren Pang, who, this is his life, I don't know. I could see why there was a little bit of a rift there, and some of the conversations that Vosters and the topics that he was bringing up. I don't know. He just wasn't a hockey nut, and Darren Pang absolutely is. And you need to get Darren Pang alongside an absolute hockey nut. And I think that's why we've seen him do such great work with TNT and the old NBC Sports broadcast that they used to have before the networks got changed. It's because he was blending well with hockey nuts, and that just wasn't happening in the Blackhawks broadcast booth. I thought it made for a weird dynamic. So for multiple different reasons, I think this was a natural step by the Chicago Blackhawks to bring someone in new as they take this next step in their rebuild. But go and drop your reaction to this news breaking yesterday down below in the comments section. Let me know your thoughts on Rick Ball, because again, I don't have the best kind of knowledge of him. I've only seen great comments from the Calgary Flames fans, though, and how much they're going to miss him. I saw people from Vancouver, when he spent time there back in the day, say it was a mistake to ever let him go. So sounds like Flame fans are pretty upset to be losing him, and for the most part, Blackhawks fans are excited to be getting him. So drop your reaction to all of this down below in the comment section. There are my thoughts, on Rick Ball replacing Chris Vosters as the new Blackhawks play-by-play man after Vosters only spent 2 years in that role with the organization. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, the intriguing conversations are not going to stop, as I'll talk about whether the Blackhawks should be kicking the tires on Carolina Hurricanes RFA forward Martin Necas. But first, I got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. We've reached the championship for both the NBA and the NHL. The Boston Celtics with a huge victory last night over the Mavericks. We got the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers kicking things off in the Stanley Cup final here this weekend. And oh yeah, baseball's also in full swing, And FanDuel is the perfect place for you to bet on every single game. And if you're a new customer, there's no better time to sign up than right now, because when you visit fanduel.com/lockedon, you'll be granted $150 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. Yes, you heard me right. $150 worth of bonus bets, whether your first bet is a win or a loss. And you can use these bonuses to bet on everything from money lines throughout the NBA championship and the Stanley Cup finals, slap shots for anytime goal scorers in the matchup between the Oilers and the Panthers, slam dunks en route to the NBA championship, and also home runs across all the great ballparks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And I told you, hockey fans out there, I'm riding with the Florida Panthers here, getting their revenge from dropping the Stanley Cup final last year. I think they're going to take down the Edmonton Oilers. I locked them in at -125 on FanDuel. I think that's a really good price. You can do the same by visiting fanduel.com/lockdown right now. And when you do, if you're a new customer, you'll get $150 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. Again, that's fanduel.com/lockdown. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Segment 2, Scott Powers of The Athletic wrote up a very interesting piece on Tuesday talking about why the Blackhawks going after Carolina Hurricanes' young, pending restricted free agent forward Martin Necas might make sense for them this offseason. And we've heard lots of rumors surrounding Necas' name for the last couple of months now, ever since even before the Carolina Hurricanes season has come to an end. There's been a little bit of a rift in their relationship. Obviously, the playoff success hasn't been sustained by the Carolina Hurricanes. They haven't been able to make those long runs, and it felt like this year was going to be such a good opportunity for them to do so, but ended up falling short to the New York Rangers in the second round. There's also been some disputes over Martin Necas wanting to play center when he's really been limited to playing on the wing so far here in Carolina. And all in all, sounds like he kind of wants to take that step to become a star forward in this league. And with the system that the Carolina Hurricanes run, the way that they go about things, he hasn't kind of been allowed to maybe shine as much as he has wanted to. And I believe there are even comments surfaced from his dad kind of voicing his displeasure with how Marty's been handled within the Carolina Hurricanes organization. And it sounds like they're going to be going through a boatload of changes here this offseason, right? With, Rod Brind'Amour potentially leaving. They got a handful of key defensemen and key forwards that they're going to have to make decisions on. Sounds like Jake Guentzel, who they acquired at this year's trade deadline, is going to be hitting the open market on July 1st. And spoiler alert, the Blackhawks are a team that could potentially be interested. Make sure to tune into tomorrow's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. I'll be talking about how realistic it is for the Blackhawks to land Jake Guentzel here this offseason. But the Blackhawks have also had their names kind of hovering around the Marty Necas sweepstakes here. They're not one of the teams that have been listed as like the front runners or the teams that are in conversations with the Canes already or really pursuing this thing actively. But according to Scott Powers, the Hawks are expected to be a team that's at least going to kick the tires around and ask about how much it will cost in order to go and get a forward like Marty Necas. And the question is here with Marty and whether the Blackhawks should try to go and get him is, what do the Carolina Hurricanes want for him? When diving into what he's done these last couple of years at the NHL level, he just turned 25 back in January, was the 12th overall pick for them back in 2017. Kind of a down year a little bit for Necas, only 53 points, 24 goals, and 29 assists in 77 regular season games, although he did add 9 points in 11 games during the Canes' short postseason run. But the reason why I say it's a little bit underwhelming is because what he had just done the season prior, 71 points in 82 games the year before, 28 goals and 43 assists. He's also a forward that's got good speed and good size at 6'2", 195 pounds. Doesn't really offer much on the defensive side of the game or away from the puck, but a very skilled forward, enough so that, numerous teams are going to be trying to figure out how they can make the best possible deal in order to pry him away from the Carolina Hurricanes before he becomes an official restricted free agent here on July 1st. But apparently, according to Elliot Friedman, the price to get Marty Necas is very high. So much so that Elias Pettersson, before things kind of got figured out for him in Vancouver, was part of a deal that was rumored to be pretty close to going down earlier on in the season with the Vancouver Canucks and the Carolina Hurricanes. So that kind of shows you what the Canes are trying to get for him, even though maybe the leverage isn't as high now that Necas is approaching being an RFA on July 1st. He's having a little bit more leverage, or the Canes are losing leverage as that time kind of passes. But I still think that the Carolina Hurricanes are going to want something notable in order to land, or in order to move a player of Martin Necas's caliber. And when breaking down exactly what the Blackhawks have and what the Carolina Hurricanes could want, this is kind of where I have difficulties figuring out exactly what the Blackhawks would be willing to offer and what the Carolina Hurricanes would agree upon. You hear Elias Pettersson's name thrown out there, and the Blackhawks don't really have a forward other than Connor Bedard right here, right now, that's going to entice Carolina enough, you would think. And even if Frank Nazar potentially could, I don't see Kyle Davidson wanting to move him, or an Oliver Moore, or anything of that sense. And on the defensive side of things, I don't think Kevin Korchinski is someone that Kyle Davidson would want to part ways with at this point in time. The Blackhawks have a surplus of D prospects, but none have as bright of a future as a Korchinski or an Alex Vlasic. They just got a deal done with him. They're absolutely not going to trade Vlasic. So it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what pieces could be in play here for the Blackhawks. The 18th overall pick, Toronto's first next year, maybe the 34th overall selection in this year, but it still feels like the Canes would want a player in return. And there's kind of the difficulty. I've heard they, absolutely could want a goaltender in return as well, but I don't see the Blackhawks wanting to get rid of Drew Commesso after the type of year that he just had in his first pro season down with the Rockford Ice Hogs. So players that I think could be in the mix here potentially: Wyatt Kaiser, Ethan Del Mastro, maybe a Ryan Green or a Gavin Hayes or something along those lines, although I think Green is probably the more intriguing of the two prospects. And then you also have to consider that Kyle Davidson hasn't given out a long-term deal yet, aside from Alex Vlasic, and that's the one that he has dished out at this point in time, and it just came, less than 2 months ago. And the projected deal for Martin Necas, according to a couple of different sources, is somewhere in between $7 to $7.5 million per year at a 7-year deal. I don't think Kyle Davidson would be wanting to dish out a full 7-year contract at that price tag for Marty Necas. I quite honestly think it would be like a 3 to 4 year deal. It's something around $7 million is the ballpark, but I don't think he'd want to sign on Necas too long term. And I feel like that's kind of what Marty would want, even though he's an RFA, he doesn't have the full negotiation rights. This is going to go to arbitration. And if it's a little bridge deal, you risk trading him and then him wanting to go somewhere else eventually. So you're going to have him sign something. I just don't know if Kyle Davidson would be all that comfortable with dishing out a 7x7 or 7x7.5 at this point in time, when you do have to save for the youngins. And also you got to think about how elite the free agent class is next summer. So there's a lot going into this. I ultimately think it winds up being too complicated for the Blackhawks to land Marty Necas, but I want them to be kicking the tires. I want them to be asking and figuring out what the price could be. And if it doesn't knock their socks off, look, they have the capabilities to do it. I just don't know exactly what pieces Kyle Davidson would be willing to part ways with. That's the complexity of the deal to me right now, and also what the Carolina Hurricanes would want in exchange. So I find it kind of unlikely that the Blackhawks wind up with Marty Necas, but it's at least promising to hear that they are kind of ready to take that next step and get another big player. They're getting close to that point. It might be 1 year too early, in my opinion, and I do ultimately think that could cost them the Jake Gensel sweepstakes, and I kind of wouldn't even really be mad about that when you look at the 2025 free agent class. Yeah, not all of those players are going to wind up hitting the open market, but there are going to be a couple really high-end guys, and the Blackhawks are going to have the financial freedom. Maybe they still will if they sign someone big this year, but they absolutely will have all the room in the world to dish out a max to someone like maybe Leon Draisaitl or a Mikko Rantanen, a player of that caliber. I would prefer that over getting a Marty Necas or a Jake Gensel. That's just me personally, but go and drop your feelings on this matter in the comment section down below. Do you think the Blackhawks should be more aggressive than I'm kind of giving them credit for Martin Necas this offseason? And also, what are kind of your thoughts on the Blackhawks making a big-time move here this summer? Would you be okay with them dishing out some Skrilla this offseason, or would you prefer for them to wait for next year's free agent class, which is littered with high-profile players? Go and drop your feelings on that down below in the comment section. But that's going to take care of my thoughts on whether the Blackhawks could pursue Martin Necas here in the next couple of weeks. It sounds like a deal could be coming here soon on that front, by the way. Coming up in just a minute, though, before I wrap things up, I still have to get into forward Michael Brandsegg-Nygard's 2024 NHL Draft Profile. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, just a reminder to please do me a favor out there. If you haven't already, hit that like button, comment down below. Make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel as well. Thank you very much. And also make sure to go and check out the new Locked On Sports Today, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So make sure to go and check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, segment 3. You didn't think I was going to go a whole episode without getting into another draft profile, right? I still got a boatload of prospects to cover leading up to this year's draft. And again, just a reminder, I've covered most of the notable prospects in this year's draft up to this point. Ivan Demidov, Artem Levshinov, Caden Lindstrom, Berkeley Catton, Zeev Buium, you name them, I've covered them thus far. And if there's a player in particular that you want to hear more about, you can easily find all of those episodes on my channel under the 2024 NHL Draft Profile playlist. And again, just a friendly reminder to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. The next draft profile that I'm going to be getting into here today, though, is none other than Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, a 6'1", 200-pound forward out of Norway, actually. And he's if he does wind up going in the first round like I expect him to, he will officially become the highest player ever drafted out of Norway. Turned 18 back in October, so one of the older players in this year's draft, and he currently plays in the Hockey Allsvenskan League, the second tier of men's professional hockey over in Sweden, and he tallied 18 points in 41 games this year in the second league over in Sweden, behind only the SHL. 8 goals and 10 assists for those 18 points for Michael Brandsegg-Nygard this past season. He also put up 12 points, 5 goals, and 7 assists early on in the year in 7 games with Moira's U20 team. So at this point in his development, he's shown that he's kind of past playing at the junior level and is more than capable of going up against grown men. As far as where MBN sits in the rankings, 16th by Elite Prospects, 20th by Bob McKenzie, 18th by Craig Button, 7th by Tony Ferrari is the highest rating here, 16th by McKean's Hockey, 14th by Chris Peters, 16th by Daily Faceoff, 16th by Sportsnet, and 11th by Dobber Prospects. So for the most part, a majority of these scouts and analysts have him ranked somewhere between number 14 and number 20. And Tony Ferrari, as I mentioned, is the only one of the bunch that has MBN rated in the top 10. When breaking down his strengths and weaknesses here, the first thing that stands out about his game is the size and the work ethic that he displays in all 3 zones. Well, I guess the size is on display anytime he's out there on the ice, obviously, but the work ethic, the intensity, the ability to make plays happen in all 3 zones, I think is very striking. He's one of the best well-rounded players in this year's draft, and I think he plays a very translatable game with how defensively responsible he already is as an 18-year-old and how willing he is to make these impacts in all 3 zones. I also like his tenacity along the boards. He likes to mix it up. His engagement is always there. It's always prevalent. Defensively, I mean, he's as good as anyone I've covered so far in this year's draft from the forward perspective on the defensive side of things, and he wants to do it. I think it is the biggest thing, and I could see him just having a very diversified role at the next level because of all the ways that he's able to impact the game. I could see him being a penalty killer at the NHL level as well. And then looking at the offensive side of things, I think absolutely his best attribute with the puck is his goal scoring ability. It's a little low key and he has a pretty deceptive shot, one of the better ones that I've covered of the forwards as well. I would say the curl and drag release is what makes it so promising. You know, you don't see many players capable of scoring like that at this level before entering the NHL. He's got a really proven wrist shot. I know we only scored 8 goals in 41 games this year, but out of those 8, a couple of them were real highlight type of goals where he uses the defender as a screen, he pulls and drags it by them, and then absolutely goes top shelf. He's got some pretty good power to his shot, some pretty good torque for a player of his size, along with some really good accuracy. He loves going glove high over the opposing goaltender is something I've noticed. So I think he could be a decent goal scorer at the next level, someone that could pot 20. And he has a decent passing and decent skating abilities for a player of his size, most notably. I think he, reads the play in front of him. He has decent vision, nothing too elite or too special, but is capable of making special plays, is capable of reading the play in front of him. Maybe not outstanding playmaking abilities, but no like true glaring weaknesses in MBN's game. And again, I think he shapes up to be a very well-rounded player at the next level. As far as the weaknesses go, kind of similar to Consta Hellenius. I'm not sure that any of the elite skills are going to make him a driving force or a top line player at the next level because, outside of the shot, he just doesn't have elite or special playmaking abilities. I don't think like some of these guys, when we break them down, they're playing checkers or they're playing chess out there. They're thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead of the defenders, whereas Michael Brandsegg-Nygard is kind of just taking what you're giving him. He plays a simplified game, which is good. I like that about him. I just don't think he has that superstar upside like most of the guys that I've covered at this point in time. And I think it's getting pretty clear. I think MBN is the 15th prospect I've covered in this draft. I think it's getting pretty clear. You can see the gap in terms of prospect talent level at this point in the draft. The top 15, top 16, like I've said, is kind of the consensus of the best players in this year. So yeah, I just don't think because he doesn't have that top end speed, that blow by you speed, he's kind of middling with the feet and, okay vision, okay puck abilities. I just don't know if he's ever going to be the guy who, even in a middle six role on a second line, like I don't see him as the dominant puck carrier, driver of offense on that line. So all in all, I think his ceiling is a bit capped for a couple of different reasons. And as far as my projection goes for MBN, I see him being a very good middle six winger that can be super versatile. He's going to be an NHLer, and he can also do that in many different roles. He's going to be defensively responsible right out of the gate. He's going to work to get better. Has an NHL level motor. Like I said, he wants to engage and he wants to compete. He wants to make an impact on the defensive side of things. I personally see that being more so as his bread and butter on maybe a third line role as a goal scorer. So I just think the offensive abilities, they're not really there all in all for Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, but I do believe that his well-rounded nature is going to have him going in the first round. I probably expect him to go somewhere between 15 and 23. I've actually heard that the Red Wings, this sounds like a typical Detroit Red Wings pick, a Swede who's already playing pro hockey overseas. Yeah, this has MBN's name written all over it at number 15. If he doesn't go there, I could see him falling out of the top 20 because, again, the offensive profile outside of the goal scoring just isn't there for me. I love his work ethic. I love his compete. He's not one of the top forwards in this year's draft because of the capped upside. And I do expect him to go in that second wave of the first round, probably somewhere between, if not Detroit at 15, then somewhere between number 17 and number 23 in my mind. As far as a long-term fit for the Blackhawks, look, I do think his skill set would be in play here for Chicago, and they do need some other types of forwards to add to the prospect pool who just aren't strictly offensive minded. And Michael Brandsegg-Nygard also has some good size to him. Look, I think they could do far worse at number 18. But I also think Kyle Davidson probably would like someone with a little bit of a higher ceiling potentially. If all of those guys go and Michael Brandsegg-Nygard is their best player available on their board at number 18, if they do stay home, I wouldn't be mad about it. He's just not my favorite prospect in this year's draft personally, but I would see the appeal in terms of how he could provide something different to the Blackhawks forward prospect pool. But that's going to wrap up my breakdown of Michael Brandsegg-Nygard's game. Go and let me know your thoughts on him down below in the comment section, whether you think he should be a guy the Blackhawks are looking at number 18. Really interested to hear your thoughts on the matter. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. Again, thank you all for tuning into the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast. And also make sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, That way you can get all the latest episodes as soon as they're uploaded each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can go and find me on X at Jack Bushman2. And make sure to check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey as well. That way you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your weekends. I will have a show come out tomorrow, I promise you. Until then, be safe. Enjoy the rest of your Friday nights. I'll see you on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.